The Peace Summit was supposed to be a turning point, a historic gathering of West African leaders held in the marble halls of a neutral zone nestled between Mali and Burkina Faso. The banners read, "Unity Beyond Borders." The world watched closely. The media called it Africa's Oslo. And at the center of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, hailed by many as a symbol of Pan-African resistance, fearless, unbought, and stubbornly sovereign. Traoré wore no ceremonial robe. Only his olive combat jacket and his fierce, unapologetic gaze. Around him sat presidents, diplomats, financiers, and former colonial envoys dressed in silk and smugness. The summit had barely begun when whispers began to circulate. Traoré had refused all security food protocols. He demanded to eat what everyone else ate. "If we break bread for peace," he had said bluntly, "we eat from the same basket." That, it turns out, was what they were counting on. The gala dinner on the third night was the summit's crown jewel, a luxurious affair meant to symbolize harmony. The hall shimmered with chandeliers and imported cutlery. Wines from South Africa, couscous from Algeria, cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire. Each leader had a designated plate, a designated server, and a private wine selection. Traoré's seat was at the far end, opposite a European envoy representing multiple international partners. They locked eyes only once, cold, brief, loaded. A violin quartet began to play. The plates were served. Glasses were filled. Traoré's cup bore the mark of Burkina Faso, a symbolic gesture. He lifted it slowly, but before it touched his lips, he paused. His instincts, honed in both battlefield and parliament, whispered. He turned slightly and handed the glass to one of his aides without a word. The aide nodded, disappeared behind the curtain. Traoré then reached for the water pitcher himself and poured into a neutral glass. He drank. He smiled. The toast began. No one noticed the original glass was gone, until 20 minutes later, the aide returned, whispering into Doumbia's ear. The security chief went pale. They had tested the wine. It contained a synthetic neurotoxin, rare, odorless, and fatal in under an hour. Doumbia leaned in to Traoré. "Sir, someone tried to poison you." Traoré didn't blink. "Then let's see who sweats." The rest of the evening unfolded in eerie calm. Traoré stood and gave a speech, measured, powerful, almost prophetic. Peace is not signed on paper. It is proven in the silence between meals, in the hand that serves the food, in the glass you offer your enemy. Let tonight be remembered not for the flavor of the wine, but for the weight of truth. A few diplomats clapped. A few stared blankly. One excused himself from the table, pretending to answer a call. He didn't return. Back in Traoré's private quarters, the evidence was laid bare. The poison used was not common. It was traced to a lab facility operating under a pharmaceutical front in Casablanca, flagged in past intelligence reports. The bottle had been smuggled into the summit via diplomatic channels, untouchable by customs. The target was clear. But the list of suspects? Long Elite, a former finance minister from a coastal nation, a media mogul known for propaganda, a Gulf state advisor with oil interests, even a West African president whose smile never quite reached his eyes. Traoré turned to his core team. They didn't just try to kill a man. They tried to kill the idea of independent leadership. Let them know we don't just survive their poisons. We purify them. He picked up the marked wine glass, the one meant to end his life, and placed it on his desk. This will remain here, not as fear, as reminder, that even peace summits have vipers at the table. Word of the attempted poisoning was not made public, not yet. But within 24 hours, quiet ripples were turning into undercurrents across the political landscape. In embassies from Accra to Algiers, whispers grew. Traoré was supposed to die. Not fall in war. Not be overthrown. Just slip away, tragically, in a moment of peace. A tragedy to be mourned with statements, but celebrated in silence by those threatened by his ideas. But he didn't die. And now they were terrified. Traoré's silence became the loudest noise in the region. He refused to address the incident officially. No interviews. No accusations. No condemnations. Just silence. But beneath that silence, the purge began. Inside the Phoenix Command Center. Buried beneath a rural airfield north of Ouagadougou, Traoré convened what he called the Circle. Not generals, not politicians, thinkers, historians, cyber analysts, agricultural innovators, ex-rebels turned teachers. They tried to poison one mouth, Traoré said, pacing the room, but the antidote will be in 1,000 minds. Phase 1 of his response, Operation Mirrorfire, a covert info dissemination campaign designed to expose the vast entanglement of foreign money, puppet media houses, and development projects that were actually espionage hubs. Documents were leaked anonymously to independent African media outlets. Satellite photos, bank transfers, audio files of backroom deals, names of advisors who were really mercenary handlers. It worked. In 10 days, 3 peace advisors from the summit were expelled from host nations. Protests erupted in cities once passive. The word neocolonialism was no longer a hashtag, it was a household term. The real target. But while the world reacted to the chaos, Traoré's intelligence unit was focused on one thing: who ordered the hit. The poisoned wine bottle had been traced not just to Casablanca, but through a forged shipping route involving a shell company, Sabrix Holdings, based in Dubai. Publicly, it dealt in agricultural innovation. Privately, it served as a laundering funnel for destabilization efforts across Francophone Africa. Its founder, Dr. Mahmoud Farouk, an exiled biotech mogul once tied to an anti-sovereignty intelligence ring funded through a Gulf-based NGO. He hadn't been seen in years. Some said he lived in Geneva. Others said he died. But Traoré had a different theory. He's not hiding. He's being protected. And if that was true, this wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was war by other means. The retaliation, quiet but brutal. Traoré didn't send in troops. He sent truth. Farouk's daughter, unknowingly complicit in her father's cover, was a social media influencer. The Phoenix Network, using buried metadata, tied her glamorous green tech startup to the very accounts Sabrix Holdings used to launder money. It went viral. Donations stopped. Investors pulled out. The startup collapsed within a week. Then came the final strike. Using diplomatic channels, Traoré authorized an open letter, not to Farouk, not to his financiers, but to the African people. It read, "They tried to poison me. Not with a substance, but with a message. Stay silent. Stay small. Stay bought. They failed. So let me respond with a new message. Speak, rise, and never sell your land for their peace." In the end, Traoré never named Farouk publicly. He didn't need to. The consortium scrambled. Assets were frozen. Fake charities were dismantled. But Traoré didn't stop there. He created a permanent chair at the Pan-African Union, the Sovereignty Tribunal, tasked with investigating hidden political manipulation, economic sabotage, and threats to self-governance. He knew they'd try again. And again. But he also knew something else. Poison only works in a body that has no resistance. It's time we build immunity. 6 months had passed since the attempted poisoning of Ibrahim Traoré. The world had not forgotten, even though no official statement had ever confirmed what truly happened at that dinner table. And yet, something had changed. A current had shifted. The summit that was meant to soften Africa's backbone had done the opposite. It had awakened it. Across the continent, youth organizations, rural cooperatives, university think tanks, and digital platforms began invoking a phrase coined in hushed tones by Traoré's inner circle. They brought poison. We brought fire. It wasn't rebellion. It was realignment. And it led to a decision that stunned the globe. Traoré announced the Rebirth Summit, a new gathering. Not in a marble hall under neutral flags, but on Burkinabe soil, beneath the open skies of Zinière, a historic site of resistance. The invitation was clear. All those who seek genuine peace rooted in dignity, not debt, come. Those who fear African independence, stay where you are. We will know your silence. The Rebirth Summit, no suits allowed. When the day arrived, there were no red carpets. Delegates arrived in sandals and work boots. No limousines, just caravans and buses. Traoré stood not on a stage, but a large stone platform, surrounded by village elders, student leaders, war widows, and engineers. He wore no microphone. And yet his voice reached all. We gather here not to negotiate our worth, but to confirm it. The last summit tried to poison us. This one will inoculate us. From now on, any agreement signed by African leaders must be accompanied by a public translation, a digital release, and a community consultation. No more fine print written in Paris. No more silent clauses traded in Zurich. From this day forward, let the world understand. Peace without truth is propaganda, and partnership without equity is exploitation. The crowd didn't clap. It roared. And as a symbolic gesture, Traoré poured a glass of wine onto the earth. Let the poison nourish the soil, and may the next harvest feed the free. The global reaction. Western media outlets rushed to spin the event. Traoré radicalizes peace process. One headline read, "Burkina Faso rejects diplomacy," said another. But the African response? Electric. Senegal's youth parliament voted to adopt Traoré's transparency mandate. Uganda announced the end of its foreign-controlled land lease programs. Even South Africa opened investigations into foreign NGO lobbying. But most striking of all, Ethiopia, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea formed the Sovereignty Quartet, an economic and political alliance independent of Western institutions. A bold move that sent a signal. The continent was no longer a chessboard. It was a player. Final scene. The Watchman of Zinière. 1 year later, Traoré walks alone near the summit site, now a public park. Children play where armored convoys once rolled. Farmers lead workshops under open tents. Artists carve history into clay. At the edge of the site stands a tall wooden sculpture. It's not of Traoré. It's of a glass, cracked down the middle. Below it, the inscription reads, "They offered wine with a smile. We answered with water and fire." Traoré looks at it and nods. Not in pride. In readiness. Because peace had finally begun. Not the kind signed in ink. The kind forged in spirit. The Rebirth Summit had sparked a continental wave of sovereignty. But as the old order crumbled, the architects of its design did not simply vanish. They retreated, regrouped, and began to whisper again. In underground boardrooms in Brussels. In soundproof villas in Dubai. In think tanks disguised as charities in London. They spoke not of saving Africa. They spoke of regaining control. And in every whispered conversation, one name haunted them. Ibrahim Traoré. They had failed to poison him. Failed to discredit him. Failed to fracture his alliances. But they had not given up. And in Geneva, behind 10 layers of legal protection and 5 layers of deniability, a council met under the codename Iron Veil. There were no official members. No signatures. Only proxies, agents, and currencies that moved through offshore ghosts. Their agenda was simple. If we cannot remove him, we must replace him. With someone who wears his face. But speaks our words. Traoré's dilemma. Months after the Rebirth Summit, Traoré began noticing shifts. Not from outside. From within. Some of his oldest allies began urging pragmatism. Whispers of strategic concessions surfaced. Advisors proposed private dialogues with stakeholders, code for foreign negotiators cloaked in investment firms. One by one, small cracks appeared. A digital blackout in northern Burkina Faso, blamed on infrastructure issues. A shipment of faulty military gear sent from a friendly country. A smear campaign claiming Traoré was amassing power for personal gain. But the most dangerous betrayal didn't come in the media. It came from a man in Traoré's own inner circle, Colonel Sari Maiga. Once loyal, now seduced. By comfort. By control. By promises that sounded like peace, but smelled like poison. The final gambit. Colonel Maiga plotted to replace Traoré during the Founders' Day address, the most televised speech in the nation. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Traoré would be escorted to the podium, where he'd find the script altered. Key passages rewritten to publicly concede authority to an interim stabilization committee. Behind him, pre-planted officers would secure him for state protection. A soft coup. No bullets. Just silence. But Traoré was no longer just a man. He was a movement with ears everywhere. The plan leaked, not to the press, but to the people. The day of the address, a crowd of 5 million showed up in Zinière, not to watch, but to protect. When Traoré stepped on stage, he said nothing for a full minute. The nation held its breath. Then he spoke. "They tried to kill me with poison. Then they tried to kill me with comfort. Now, they try to kill me with lies. But I do not belong to the state. I belong to the people. And today, the people speak." He turned, and instead of being arrested, the soldiers saluted him. The coup crumbled. Maïga disappeared before sunrise. Rumors say he fled toward Ghana. Others say he was handled by the Phoenix Guard. The closing vision. In the months that followed, Traoré restructured leadership, decentralized power, instituted rotational councils led by farmers, teachers, and youth leaders. He remained a symbol, not a ruler. At night, he would walk the streets of Ouagadougou in silence, sometimes alone, sometimes with Salif, watching murals being painted, listening to radio debates, witnessing what he always believed in. A people awakened. Final words, narration style. They tried to poison his body. They failed. Then they tried to poison his message. They failed again. Because you can silence a man, but you cannot bury the truth once it has learned to walk among the people. And so, Africa walked. Not behind Ibrahim Traoré, but beside him. 10 years later, the day the world turned to listen. The year is 2035. In a continent once fragmented by exploitation and diplomacy dressed as debt, the tides had turned, not with guns, but with governance, not with rage, but with resolve. Burkina Faso now stood as a model of Afro-resilience, a nation once underestimated, now studied in universities from São Paulo to Seoul. Its economy was locally rooted, digitally fluent, and youth-driven. Its land no longer leased. Its voice no longer borrowed. And yet, Ibrahim Traoré, the man who had defied death, deception, and division, remained humble in posture and silent in ambition. He had never reclaimed the title of president. Instead, he bore a simpler name, the People's Witness. He had declined all statues, all portraits, but the people honored him their own way. They built a library, not with his name, but with his story etched in every wall. A place where every African language was preserved. Every colonial lie was dissected. Every future blueprint was written not in ink, but in intention. One morning, a child asked him during a school visit, "Uncle Ibrahim, why didn't you become the ruler of Africa?" He smiled, gently touched the child's head, and said, "Because Africa doesn't need rulers anymore. It needs reminders. That power is not a throne, but a duty passed hand to hand." Final scene. In the Sahel, the wind moves gently over fields once marked by war, now sown with millet and mango trees. And at the summit of Zinière, where he once poured out poisoned wine, a single glass remains. Cracked. Untouched. Not as a symbol of survival, but as a warning. A reminder that they tried to poison him at a peace summit. And instead, he purified a continent. Fade out. Text on screen. You can kill a man, but you cannot kill the memory of courage, nor the inheritance of dignity.